Jalen Daniels, I think is finally getting back to what we expected maybe him to be at the start of the season. Jalen Daniels played, I think, his best game of the year against Arizona State. He's been steadily improving. He's been looking sharper in conference play. If you set aside the non-conference games, he's been looking better. You go back to the West Virginia game, played pretty well against TCU, struggled late, but overall I think that was still a game where there was some improvement shown, and then things kind of came together against Arizona State where he did look pretty good.
Thanks for listening to KC Sports Network, proudly presented by Emprise Bank. If you're thinking about starting a business or know someone who is, check out Emprise Bank's SBA loans. It's always good to know your options, and they can be your partner in possible.
Paid all who enter. Beware this podcast. That's right, it says the Paid Podcast on the Kansas City Sports Network. I'm Nick Springer. I'm here with Kevin Flaherty. We're brought to you by Emprise Bank, partner all things possible. And we are back from a bye week for football. We've done some basketball content. If you want to check that out with the season coming up, you can be sure to head over to our Spotify channel on audio, also our YouTube channel at Kansas Jayhawks KCSN to check that out. Some of the basketball shows, Basketball Media Day. You also check out some exclusive video content we have from talking to some of the players over the course of Big 12 of KU Basketball Media Day from earlier in the week. You can head over to our YouTube channel to view some of that as well. We've got a lot of content about that. And obviously, we're now going to be into a bit of a crossover season. Like this, Kevin? Like this?
I like that.
Crossover season. So we're going to be hitting basketball and football coming up for the next couple of months as well. And obviously, after the bye week for KU, a chance at the reset button. They are 1-5, and they are coming into this game against Houston. Kevin, where do you want to start with this, man? KU's trying to hit the reset button. Houston was a dog shit team that didn't score a single point for like 10 quarters. And then they beat the hell out of TCU. I mean, how are you feeling at this point heading into this game for KU at Arrowhead against Houston?
You're trying to get me to cuss on this thing, first of all, but
I'm not trying to get you cussed. I'm just calling it like I see it. I mean,
but no, it's interesting because I mean, I think the world knows that I have a deep and tempestuous love affair with Willie Fritz. It was kind of funny today. I was telling Henry over at the Lawrence World that I had been calling for him to get the KU job since like 15 or something, and Henry didn't believe me. And so I went back and I was wrong. It was actually 2014. So I've liked Willie Fritz for a long time, and that's a really roundabout way to say when we talked about Houston before the season started, Nick, I think both of us kind of felt like Houston would be undermanned, but that Willie Fritz would find a way to get them a couple. That they were going to be well coached, that they were going to find things. The problem with Houston for so much of this season has just been the offense has been awful. I think on the offensive line, I think they're not there. I think a lot of the skill position guys, maybe not at the level that they will be a few years from now. But a good quarterback can mask a lot of things. And unfortunately for the University of Kansas, Willie Fritz seemed to kind of find his quarterback in Zion Chris, who had played some behind Donovan Smith, but really got his chance against TCU and ran with it. Literally 21.5 miles per hour ran with it. Had a 71-yard touchdown run, I think, in that game. Really ran the ball well. And one of the things that we've seen with him from, whether it was his stops, in the MIAA, Georgia Southern, wherever, Tulane, he really likes a quarterback that can run it. And so now that he's kind of got that guy, this game becomes a lot more dangerous, right? For multiple reasons. One of the reasons being, hey, you have a quarterback, you're probably going to be a little bit better team. But another part of it is that kind of aligns with where Kansas has really been struggling defensively this year. And Kansas has had a bye week for some guys to get a little bit healthier, but I think also go back to the drawing board a little bit and say, here's how we have defended scrambling quarterbacks or run first quarterbacks. Here's how we could defend them, maybe try and find some answers there. And Nick, it's really important they do find those answers, not just for Saturday, but with Kansas State and Avery Johnson on the way the week after that. And so I think when you look at this game, you have two teams that really want to get a win. Houston obviously was able to get their first Big 12 win. They're actually ahead of Kansas in the standings right now. And they did it against TCU a week after Kansas lost to TCU at Arrowhead. And so it's a team that really needs to be taken seriously. They're trying to build momentum. They've found some things that work. And on the flip side, Kansas is coming off of a bye week. They're a little bit more fresh, I think, than they were going in. I think you had a chance maybe to reset some batteries mentally, which is going to be a big thing for them. Now the question is, can they get sort of over that hump? And we've talked on this show before, whether it's Kansas winning by 25 or it's Kansas winning on a butt fumble in a game that they should not win, I really think that this is a team that just needs to have something go good for them on Saturdays to kind of help them in the second half of the season.
And I'm excited to break things up here. I've got good news. I've got bad news.
Oh, God.
Good news first. Or you want the bad news first?
My wife always goes with the bad news first so that you can do the proverbial, compliment sandwich and end on a good note. So let's
bad news first.
Not a negative person, but let's end on the positive note. Let's go with the bad news.
Okay, bad news first. Here's the bad news. We'll start with this. Kansas obviously 1-5. Everyone knows that.
Yep.
Second part is something that you talked about there, which is Houston has seemingly found its quarterback. Donovan Smith had been the starter for Houston for a while to start the year, and he was really bad. Yep. As I said, Houston did not score a point for 2 consecutive games. They were shut out by both Cincinnati and Iowa State. 3 weeks ago, I looked at this game, and I was like, automatic W. I mean, why are we, don't even get off the bus. Why are we even playing this game? He's obviously going to win. Then all of a sudden, here comes Mr. Zion Chris, like you mentioned. 71-yard touchdown run against TCU. Houston absolutely annihilates TCU with Chris at quarterback. They look like a completely different team. Bad. Very bad, obviously. What does Kansas struggle with? You said it. They struggle with mobile quarterbacks. Immediately flashbacks to Garrett Green for West Virginia running around. Or Luka back when he still played for UNLV, which he doesn't anymore. It's crazy. So, yeah, really bad. Really not good.
Sam Levitt,
Really not good that Houston has seemingly found their quarterback, and also the thing that he happens to be probably the best at is the thing that KU struggles with the most. So that's bad. I mentioned the TCU game. Obviously, Kansas loses to TCU at Arrowhead, and then TCU goes and plays at home against Houston and just gets absolutely annihilated. I mean, It just was not even close. They just got absolutely blasted, shit canned, whatever way you can describe it. It was bad. They got down 17-0 at home. Houston just rolled them. TCU fought back a little bit. They ended up losing by 11, but it was never a game at all. So that's obviously a major red flag. If you're Kansas, you just lost to a team at home, in Arrowhead. And they go and play at home against this Houston squad, and Houston just absolutely rolls them. So that's bad. The third thing is, you mentioned some of the, recharging of batteries and so on and so forth for KU in the bye week. And I think in some aspects they did do that. But this KU defense, if you want to take some of the words that Lance Leipold said and what Brian Borland said, the defense is decimated by injury.
Well,
really, really not good. Earlier in the week, Lance Leipold gave, I don't even know if you can really call it an injury update. He was pretty vague, but he did give some definitive answers on a couple of guys. Most notably, a lot of people right away saw on Monday when KU released his depth chart for the week that there was an or with Kobe Bryant on the depth chart. People were kind of panicking about that. It doesn't have anything to do with his play. You may have forgotten, though, because of the bye week, Kobe Bryant went down with an injury at the end of the Arizona State game, and that's really where that or comes from. Lance Leipold called him highly questionable as of Monday, which does not sound very encouraging. So we'll see. We'll see what kind of role he plays. Cordell Wheeler is outfield. Also,
that's the bit. As good as Kobe is, and obviously, heading into the season with all Big 12 honors and all of those things, I think you would agree with me that the Cornell Wheeler loss has really done over on this defense.
It's not even close. He's by far the biggest loss that G's had. So that's obviously not ideal. Lance Leipold, again, as of Monday, called him doubtful. I also mentioned they've got a slew of other injuries. Both the Dye brothers, I think, are going to be more than likely not available for Kansas at the safety position, so they're going to be pretty thin in their secondary, especially if Kobe ends up not playing as much or playing the whole game for Kansas. So that is really a major concern for me coming into this game against Houston, is that this defense is very much struggling with injuries on the backside. Now up front, besides Cordell Wheeler, they are, I think, relatively healthy when you look across like the D-line and whatnot. But yeah, the Cordell Wheeler loss is significant. Brian Moreland took some time to speak about Tywone Berryhill. I've said it before, like, I think Tywone Berryhill is serviceable as a backup at this level, but he's not serviceable in terms of the number of snaps that JU's asking him to play at this point, but they don't really have a choice. They don't really have any other options with Cordell Wheeler out. It does seem like Jason Gilliam's going to be back in the lineup for KU. He's been dealing with injury as well. But yeah, it doesn't seem like the bye week really helped Kansas that much. Again, if you really want to take what Lance Leipold said kind of at its face, it doesn't sound like the bye week really helped them get that much healthier, especially on the defensive side of the ball. So that is also very poor. So those are some of the bad things. That's some of the bad news that is coming up on this game for KU against Houston. That's some of the bad news. The other thing about this is, and you kind of mentioned it with Houston and sort of the rebuild that they're in. And I want to get your take on this, Kevin, actually.
Sure.
Or I kind of thought about it. I think Houston is in a somewhat similar position, if you look at it strictly from this season, somewhat similar position to what Kansas was in 2021, with a new head coach trying to come in and rebuild the program. And I even think you could actually argue that maybe Houston, from a just strictly, if you're taking a snapshot like of this season, like forget about the history of the program, like KU's history, obviously of being of struggling is significant. But if you were to look at it strictly from like Houston in 2024 versus Kansas in 2021, Houston may actually be in a bit of a worse spot compared to Kansas at that time, because they've only been at this Power 4 level for a couple of years, and they certainly don't have the depth of power talent that Kansas maybe had in 2021 that Lance Leipold had to work with. But on the flip side, Houston obviously has the transfer portal is now more of a thing. NIL is more of a thing now than it was 3 years ago, so that probably helps them as well. But I don't know. Do you see a comparison there at all potentially between what Houston is this season versus what Kansas was when Lance Leipold showed up?
Yeah, I think so, because I think you see deficiencies in both, right? In terms of either the talent level isn't where you want it to be. I do think in 2021, Kansas had kind of this undercarriage of young talent that hadn't really emerged, getting ready to emerge. Houston, I don't know that they have that part, Nick. I talked to a good friend of mine who works for Dave Campbell's Texas Football about Houston and kind of where they're at. And one of the things he mentioned was, they've got some guys who are good football players, but maybe not necessarily good, not necessarily Big 12 athletes and guys that you would recruit for this level. Obviously, I think the comparison that you would make if you looked at it at Kansas would be a guy like Rich Miller, where Kansas, he wasn't necessarily a high-level athlete at Big 12 linebacker, but he was a really good football player, and he knew how to get guys lined up, and so there was a lot of value to him. I think Houston's got a lot of those sorts of guys. It's just going to be, and at Houston, obviously, and Willie Fritz can go outside of his door, throw a rock, and hit a really talented defensive lineman from a high school recruiting standpoint, and so maybe they're in a better spot as far as that goes. But I do see a lot of similarities. I also think there's similarities in that you're trying to build a culture that maybe hadn't been there or had evaded, at Houston, because Houston was fairly solid a couple of years ago, but it had all kind of gone downhill since that point in terms of culture. And so you're trying to stack wins, not necessarily because you're saying, hey, let's go to a bowl or hey, let's do this. It's more just that you're trying to lay that foundation for what could be a better for them, 2026 or 2025 season, a lot like 2022 was for Kansas. You're laying the building blocks for maybe a bowl season, not this year, but potentially next year. And I like the comparison too, Nick, because in 2021, at the end of that year, Kansas found its quarterback. When you look at the way that Jalen emerged, he wasn't the starter. He wasn't the number 2 guy. They were trying to redshirt him. And then because of injuries, he came in and obviously had the performance against Texas. Everybody looked at that almost on its own, but you look at what he did the next couple weeks, too, against TCU and West Virginia. Kansas left 2021 feeling like, okay, we've got somebody at the quarterback position that we can build this thing around. I think TCU, finding its quarterback, that may be just as important as anything that they wind up doing this year, with the possible exception of just building overall culture. So, yeah, I do like that comparison.
Yeah, so to sort of put a recap on the bad news portion, the bad news segment, Kansas defense dealing with some injuries. Houston has singly found a quarterback that has some strengths that the KU defense has struggled with. Houston suddenly looks like a revitalized team after they hadn't scored a point in 2 weeks. They beat a team that KU lost to at Arrowhead. It's not looking great, but have no fear. There is some good news. And because Kevin picked the bad news first, we're going to get to the good news. And I can get to the good news right now. The good news is you can go to homefieldapparel.com.
Knew you were going to see that.
You can get yourself some home field apparel gear to gear up for this crossover season between KU football and KU basketball. Great news is Home Field's got you covered with some basketball and football apparel. You can get an Orange Bowl shirt. You can get a shooting shirt for KU basketball. The Slam and Jam and Jayhawks shirt is a popular one as well over at homefieldapparel.com. So you can get decked out in all sorts of KU gear for both football and basketball. Use the promo code PAYHEAT24 for your 15% off your first order over at homefieldapparel.com. That's PAYHEAT24 for 15% off your first order. But seriously, there is more good news. There is good news. It's coming up on the other side.
Looking for tickets for your next event? Tickets for Less is your number one source. Save big on every purchase when you use promo code KCSN at ticketsforless.com.
You know when you discover a new binge-worthy show or a song that you bump on repeat and you have to share it with your friends so they can experience just how awesome it is? That's kind of what it feels like when you discover Mint Mobile offers premium wireless for $15 a month when you purchase a 3-month plan. That's such an awesome deal, there's no way you can keep it to yourself. Friends don't let friends overpay for wireless. Say bye-bye to your overpriced wireless plan and switch to Mint Mobile. Mint Mobile is here to rescue you and your squad with premium wireless plans starting at $15 a month. All plans come with high-speed data and unlimited talk and text delivered on the nation's largest 5G network. Use your own phone with any Mint Mobile plan and bring your phone number along with all of your existing contacts. Ditch overpriced wireless with Mint Mobile's deal and get 3 months of premium wireless service for $15 a month. To get this new customer offer and your new 3-month premium wireless plan for just $15 a month, go to mintmobile.com/payheed. That's mintmobile.com/payheed. Cut your wireless bill to $15 a month at mintmobile.com/payheed. $45 upfront payment required, equivalent to $15 a month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes on unlimited plan. Additional taxes, fees, and restrictions apply. See Mint Mobile for details.
Podcast on the Kansas City Sports Network. I'm Nick Springer. I'm here with Kevin Flaherty. We're brought to you by Emprise Bank, your partner in all things possible. Member FDIC. Be sure to leave us a comment. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel at Kansas Jayhawks KCSN for exclusive video content and all of our shows. You can also, of course, on the audio side, listen on Spotify, Apple, and leave us a 5-star rating review. Share a comment. You can also drop us a comment on the KCSN mobile hotline at 913-407-6524. To join in the conversation, you can drop a comment on our YouTube channel as well. I promise you, we'll read all those comments also. So tons of ways to share your thoughts and feelings about football, basketball, life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, anything you want to talk about. You know, this is a KU show, but we'll talk about anything else. However, if you have any questions about Nick Baum, sorry, it's confidential. I'm not going to get into that for a little bit. So sorry, can't answer any further questions about that. It's
proprietary.
Yeah, that's right. It's proprietary information that I am not at liberty to speak about. I probably have already said too much about it. I'm sure I'll be hearing from the bosses at Nick Palm. They're not going to be very thrilled that I'm speaking about it, but it is what it is. We'll set that aside for now. Okay, as I said, there's a lot of bad news for KU going against Houston, but there is some good news, Kev. You want to hear the good news, Kevin?
I would love to hear the good news, Nick.
All right, let's start here with the good news. The good news is, first off, Jalen Daniels, I think is finally getting back to what we expected maybe him to be at the start of the season. Jalen Daniels played, I think, his best game of the year against Arizona State. He's been steadily improving. He's been looking sharper in conference play. If you set aside the non-conference games, he's been looking better. You go back to the West Virginia game, played pretty well against TCU, struggled late, but overall I think that was still a game where there was some improvement shown. And then things kind of came together against Arizona State where he did look pretty good. So I think Jalen Daniels is steadily improving, and that has kind of been in combo with Jeff Grimes starting to figure some things out as well, I think, for KU in terms of the play calling. Obviously, I know Jeff Grimes is still a bit of a hot button issue, I think, for a lot of people, but I don't think there's any denying that over the last 3 games, the offense has shown steady improvements. From West Virginia to TCU, again, with some more ups and downs, but Arizona State was maybe his best game, Jeff Grimes' best game. And I don't think it's a coincidence that Jalen Daniels has been improving at the same time that Jeff Grimes has been improving.
Sure.
There's definitely a coincidence there. So that is some good news. That's some great news, I think, that the offense is starting to figure things out and put some things together. On top of that, you had the bye week, so you have more time to prepare for the offense. You're going to have a healthy Devin Neal, healthy Daniel Heischel. The offense is pretty much fully healthy. I know we talked about some injuries on the defense, but across the board, the offense is looking pretty healthy. So you should be in a position, I think, offensively in this game against Houston to hopefully build upon what you've been doing and then have some more success here in this game against Houston as well.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I thought it was interesting. One of the things that Jeff Grimes said was basically he talked about in the passing game they had some inconsistencies and how they were a little bit up and down in the first half of the season. But he talked about, too, how there were some areas that they could make strides in the run game. And I think that's not something that people tend to think about, right? They tend to think, hey, the running game has been pretty solid. It's something that the passing game just needs to come along. But there are plays to be had in the running game for them as well. And I think the two are linked, Nick, in that one of the things that Jeff Grimes said is they're facing a lot of single high, a lot of cover 1, cover 3. The easiest way to pull that safety out of the box and make it a cover 2, cover 4 look is to hit on some shot plays. And while Jalen playing well against Arizona State in general, I think was encouraging. I think one of maybe the most encouraging parts was it was also breakout for Skinner and hit some shot plays. And so if they're able to connect on a few more of those where teams have to really respect them, get them everybody really wants to make sure that Mahomes doesn't beat them over the top. And so they play, 2 safeties back pretty much at all times. Well, that's really the rushing best rate. I think that's something that could help KU from a running standpoint. I think a lot of those over-the-middle throws that we've talked about, maybe Jalen's struggling with in from a confidence standpoint, if you're playing cover 3 and then you go to cover 4, there's fewer guys in the middle of the field for when you throw stuff into those areas as well. And I think that if they're able to hit on more shot plays, if Quentin Skinner continues to play well, and one of sort of the resounding themes today was that Jalen Daniels and Quentin Skinner, who's actually his roommate, had been throwing together, quite a bit after practice for a couple weeks, sort of heading into that Arizona that led into the breakout. And so if that continues, I think Kansas's offense could even hit, another level or two from where they were at against Arizona State.
Yeah, I think at this point, everyone probably knows that Jalen Daniels and Luke Grimm have a really strong connection. But to build that with a guy like Quentin Skinner, and then you throw in a guy like Lawrence Arnold, who I know has been up and down start this season, but look, this wide receiver core was absolutely looked at as a pretty significant strength for KU coming into this season with that trio of guys. And I think Luke Grimm has probably lived up to expectations, but probably not Quentin Skinner and Lawrence Arnold. And if you can get one of those guys going, just adds another weapon that can help take the top off of defense, especially when you think about a guy like Quentin Skinner, who is sort of that explosive deep threat for Kansas. So hopefully that does come to fruition. Hopefully that does come to fruition. That should only further lead to more success for KU on the ground, like you said, with Devin Neal and Daniel Heischel. Another piece of good news here, Kevin. We kind of touched on it a little bit already. With Kansas, they are by far, I think, the superior team in terms of talent.
Yep.
This is a game in which you absolutely have the talent advantage, and it's not by a small margin. I think it's pretty significant. So if there was ever a game, I think if you were going to sort of get back on track, I know our good friend John, who likes to comment a lot on the shows, talked about a couple weeks ago about Houston being sort of the last chance game. I had kind of said it was Arizona State. KU obviously didn't win against Arizona State, but here I am anyways. So I guess I'll go to the hypocrite. But you're playing against a Houston team that is, I think, by far the less talented team So if you're Kansas, you can assert your dominance early, take control because of the more talented team. That's a piece of good news.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And I think that when you listen to people talk about this Houston team, one of the things that they'll say is that they won't beat themselves, right? They're waiting for you to beat yourself. And I think that was one of the things maybe lost a little bit in that TCU game, was that TCU kind of crapped all over itself, with turnovers and things like that. And Kansas has gotten better in that front. The only turnover against TCU was a pick that was like late in the game after it had already been decided. No turnovers against Arizona State. And so if Kansas, being the more talented team, takes care of the ball, continues that trend, and plays clean from a turnover standpoint, I do really like their chances to win this one. And I think, too, to your point, I think if Kansas can build an early lead, you can kind of pull Houston out of some of the things that it wants to do and put Houston in a spot where it's kind of operating off its back foot a little bit, and that gives you your chance. No,
I 100% agree. I did want to unpack that a little bit more, because that was going to kind of lead into more of my good news, which is I think if Kansas can build a strong script offensively to start the game, which we have seen them do. If you look at how they started games offensively, following game script, they've been pretty good. I think if you can build a strong start to this game for Kansas and get out by 7, 10, 14 points pretty early, you should be able to then put the pressure on Houston, and hopefully that kind of shakes it up a little bit, like you said, because to be quite honest, the more I kind of think about this game, the path to victory for Houston is really not that complex, I don't think.
Yeah,
I think Houston coming into this game, it's simply make it a dogfight, keep it close, and if it's a one possession game in the third or fourth quarter, Kansas will crumble, because guess what? That's what Kansas has been doing the whole season. They've been crumbling late, in games, even if they have the lead, right? But if you're Kansas, if you can find a way to build, a multiple possession lead early in the game to where then, look, I'll just say this. The best way to not lose a one-score game is to not be in a one-score game. Just be up by more than one score and you're fine. Like it's not rocket science. Just have more points and you're good. So I think that's the biggest key. And I think, if you're Houston, if you're really Fred sitting there, you're saying to yourself, okay, all we got to do is keep this game tight, get into a dogfight, and late in the third, fourth quarter, keep it at a one-possession game, and then wait for Kansas to make a mistake. Because, unfortunately, that's what Kansas has done in a lot of games this season. So I think on the flip side, if you KU, get off to a hot start, build an early lead, a comfortable lead, build some momentum, get some confidence going on your sideline, and then allow that to carry you then to put the pressure on Houston to try to, get away from what they maybe want to do, like you said, and try to keep up. And B, if you can build an early lead and build that confidence, maybe that does kind of ignite what we've been hoping to see from Kansas the first 6 games, right? Because I think at the start of the season, I don't think we made specific score picks in our preseason shows for this, but in the preseason, I would have said KU should win this game by like 40. So obviously, it's not there yet. It's not there now, but they're the more talented team, and this is a game where I think if you can get out early, you're going to be in position to hopefully just kind of ride that momentum and carry your way to the finish. And again, best way to not lose a one-score game is to just not even have it be one score, and then you don't have to worry about it. So I honestly think that it's pretty cut and dry in terms of the path to winning for Houston versus how Kansas can counter that. And it comes down to the start of the game, how Kansas can start the game against Houston, and then can you build enough of a lead through the middle of the game towards the end to where you'll become impervious to making the mistakes that have cost you some games you played earlier in the year, and the pressure is then on Houston to try to rally back or whatever, something that they have not shown that they could do. Again, this is a team that over the course of 3 games got shut out twice and scored, I think, 7 points in their other loss before they played TCU. So it's not like this offense has really proven much. I know with Jan Chris, they did more against TCU, but even still, I'm not afraid of Houston's offense. I'm afraid of the fact that Kansas has a lot of injuries on defense. But Houston's offense on its face does not scare me as long as you don't let Zion Chris run all over the place, which is possible. But, setting that aside, the Houston offense is not an offense that particularly scares me. So if you can get up early in this game for Kansas, to me, that'll be the biggest key on top of building that and then allowing that to carry you through the rest of the game.
Chris threw the ball pretty well against TCU, pretty efficiently, right? Like he was 15 of 18 for 141 yards. So you're looking at a...
He's not throwing it downfield.
Yeah, and so when you look at that, the ball is coming out quickly. There's a lot of screen passes, was something that Brian Boylan looked at. A lot of RPO, kind of quick throws where you're deciding pretty quickly where to go with the ball. And so when you look at all of that and the way that offense is built, this probably isn't a game where even with KU's secondary missing some guys, Houston is going to throw for 250. And so if you can really concentrate on that running game and making life difficult and putting them into downs where they have to throw the ball, that's advantage Kansas in those situations. And so I do think that you're right. Like, I think that there's kind of a window there where Houston wins this game, and a lot of it revolves around Kansas making mistakes. It's not necessarily, hey, Houston coming out and being the better team here. Now, I realize some people are going to be terrified because he's a run-first quarterback, and we've seen, where that has gone. And so I think people have sort of nightmarish visions of Kansas getting Houston to 3rd and 8 and Chris running for 16. I do wonder a little bit what are going to be some of the answers that Kansas has in those situations. I think you may see more spies in those situations. It was interesting. One of the things that Brian Borland said today was that when KU has had plays with spies, those have generally been pretty effective. They haven't typically gotten burned on those situations. And so I wonder if, because West Virginia was more of a challenge, right? Because if you spied, maybe you stopped Garrett Green from running the ball, but then the receivers were tearing apart KU on the back end. And it's somewhat similar with Arizona State. When Arizona State threw the ball, it got pretty much anything it wanted. I think this is a situation where maybe you can decide to take that extra guy out of coverage, and that might be the better situation just because you don't feel like KU is going to get consistently beat by the Houston passing game.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that Houston has that level of wide receiver talent to maybe fully take advantage of something like that, right? Like, in my eyes, shit, 1 spy, 2 spies, however many damn spies do you need? Call it. I don't care. I mean, that's kind of the world. That's kind of where I'm at right now. Like, and I think, even from my perspective, like, I would almost rather see Zion Chris throw a ball, 30 yards down the field for a completion than have to watch him run around for 25 yards. Like we watched some of the other quarterbacks previously that KU was playing. Like, I don't even think I would be mad if that happened. Like, if he throws it down, like, I wouldn't even be upset. I'd be like, okay, well, at least we spied him and made him, do something else, beat KU some other way. Yeah. I wouldn't even be upset at that point, I don't think.
Yeah, I think you're right. And it's funny to look at because we're talking about Houston being this run-first team. Houston hasn't run the ball as well as KU has this year. So KU is both more successful running the ball and throwing the ball. And I get that, Houston's played one game with Zion Chris as like the dude. But at the same time, even in that game, it wasn't like the offense just had this unbelievable level of production. And I think Kansas's defensive line is better than Houston's offensive line. I think that when you look at Houston's skill position talent, there isn't, a Scattaboo or a Josh Besh or guys like that are really going to give them the issues that those individual players have in the past. And so I do think a lot of it is going to come down to, hey, can Kansas just not beat itself on offense? They don't need to be perfect. They don't need this doesn't need to be a 450-yard game for the offense. But if they can move the ball well enough and not give Houston short fields and turn the ball over, and this could be a really good game to lean on that running game. I mean, Houston, the run defense isn't bad, but they give up like 4 yards a carry, so it's not elite either. This could be a game where you look at Devin Neal and Daniel Highshaw and kind of say to him, like, hey, guys, expect 35 carries between the two of you. Get Jalen Daniels out, give him some carries and things of that nature. I think one of a couple things will happen. Houston's done a pretty good job of avoiding allowing big plays. I think their secondary is pretty solid, but Kansas is going to force Houston to make a decision, right? If they stick in that cover 3, maybe there's a chance for a big play in the passing game here or there. And if Kansas hits on those, Kansas may be able to run away and hide, Nick, in this game. And if they don't bring that safety down, if they say, hey, we're going to make you execute in front of us over and over again, that could be the situation where Kansas runs the ball pretty well and is able to control this thing offensively, control the tempo, and avoid sort of those high-risk plays as well.
And look, credit to the players. Lance Leipold, I think, spent some time earlier in the week talking about how the locker room has not wavered, right? Like this team has not wavered in terms of what they believe in and what they're trying to do. He spent some time kind of speaking about that process. And I think obviously from an outside perspective, it's easy to call for change and so on and so forth when a team is 1-5 like this with some of the expectations that Kansas had. But I think if there's one thing that Lance Leipold has proven, good or bad, this was one where I was like, is this good news or is this bad news? Wasn't really sure where to fall this, but if there's one thing Lance Leipold has proven is that he's generally not going to be persuaded from outside influence as to what he wants to do with his process, right? Like that's obviously very apparent because otherwise, maybe he would have made a change. But he clearly very much believes in his staff, and he clearly very much believes in the team, and it sounds like the team still believes in themselves, and still, the locker room is still together, which is certainly a positive sign. That that's the good news aspect of it. But the bad news aspect of it is, I've mentioned this before, is that believing in a process and having a process day in and day out is great, but if you're not getting a positive result, at least a little bit, it kind of becomes a house of cards to where the whole thing can just be blown over if you're not having some positive results. And I know, constantly Jalen Daniels and Lance Leipold and others within the program were talking about how they are not outcome, they're not outcome driven, and that's fine. You can have that perspective, but you have to have some positive outcome at some point, right? Like again, otherwise it just the whole thing just kind of falls down. So I don't know. This does seem like the chance for KU to get things back on track. Unnamed sportsbook, no free ads, unnamed sportsbook. KU's anywhere from 6.5 to 7.5, 8.5 point favorites in the game against Houston. So I think the bettors certainly believe in Kansas to win this game against Houston. And again, I think the good news this week outweighs the bad in the sense of the offense is playing well. You have the more talented team. Yes, you're dealing with injuries, but I don't think it's a situation where Houston maybe should be able to capitalize too much off of that. But look, these games are played on paper, obviously, and Kansas, obviously, if they were played on paper, might have 4 or 5 wins at this point. So that's part of the problem. So they've got to go out and prove it. They've got to go out and prove that they can get it done. Games at Arrowhead Stadium. I think weather-wise, I haven't checked the forecast recently. I think it's going to be pretty nice on Saturday in Kansas City. Mid-70s, sunny, so should be great. Should be a great opportunity to get out there. I'll be curious about the fan turnout, obviously, with kind of how the results have gone so far this season, but we'll see.
Well, with the winter coming, they could a little bit extra too. I'm interested to see how that plays out. Obviously, usually at homecoming, you go home to Lawrence and you visit and everything else. But I do know I was in a fraternity, and they have a fairly big event planned, for people to go to the game at Arrowhead for a lot of the Kansas City alums and things like that. And so part of me wonders a little bit whether the attendance will be a little bit better than maybe your average person thinks, just because, hey, they're 1-5. But at the same time, if people are coming back, you could be having those big groups going for homecoming, so that could help. To your point about, and it was a well-made one, I thought, about process versus results. I always thought it was really interesting when Lance Leipold would talk about 2001, and we talked about that season a little bit earlier in this episode.
Or 2021.
2021, yeah. Did I say 2000? Yeah.
Yeah, it's like 2001.
2001. You know. No, 2021, when he talked about that season, he said he felt like, I don't want to say that things had turned, but that things were already moving positively prior to the Texas game. And he pointed to the Oklahoma game, right, where they had kind of the fluky Caleb Williams play on fourth down, and they wound up losing.
The complete BS Caleb Williams play on fourth down?
I was setting you up for that one. But I do think, to his point, one of the things that he said about the importance of the Texas game was he was like, the Texas game wasn't when we figured it out. Like, people were playing better. They were, we were on that path already through the process. What was so important about the Texas game was that they were finally shown something tangible and reward for what they were doing with the process. And to your point, I think that's where Kansas is heading into this game with Houston, and that they've continued to do the process. They've continued to check in every single day. By all accounts, today we got to speak to the players as well. And the players talked about, hey, it's one foot in front of the other. They're saying all the right things. They've kept marching forward. But you still have to have sort of that reward there. It's only human, right? You have to see that thing that says, hey, this process is working the way that it should. And unfortunately, KU's lost to some teams that are having some pretty good seasons now. And you can't look back and say, oh, I feel good about the Arizona State loss because they beat Utah. You have to have something actually work out well for you specifically. And I think that that's where the importance of this game is you and I have talked about it. I think a lot of the block is almost like kind of mental. And I think that once they get over that, we may see, I'm not saying we're going to see 10-win KU show up for the final 6 games of the season, but I do think that Kansas playing with the confidence that it expected to play with it and finding those things, I think could be a much more effective football team. And I think the thing that's probably between them doing that or not doing that is maybe winning a game, having that payoff in the win-loss column where you can kind of say, okay, the ball didn't bounce against us that time. We did what we were supposed to do. We won a football game right on the right track. And I think things could start rolling in a positive direction from that point. And I think that while Houston, there are a lot of things that make this game scarier than maybe it was 3 or 4 weeks ago, I also think that this represents a pretty good chance for Kansas to kind of have that tangible reward for staying the course and just sort of reinforcing across that locker room. Not saying there are any locker room issues, just saying, hey, people are human, and it helps when you can look at it and say, hey, I did the right things at practice this week and we won. Let's do the right things at practice again.
Oh, yeah. Even with Houston having the boogeyman, Zion Chris, now being their starter, this is still far and away KU's best chance to get a win, right, for the rest of the season, basically, right? You look at the rest of KU's schedule, they go, at K-State's going to be tough. Iowa State at home also going to be tough for a variety of reasons that we can get into. Then you go at BYU, who suddenly looks like they can be a Big 12 title contender. Play Colorado at home. Colorado, we talked about it in the preseason. They could either be a team that's on the up or a team that's spiraling. It looks like they're going to be sort of a team that's on the up at this point. I guess we'll see what they do after their loss against J-State. And then you go at Baylor on the road against Baylor at the end of the year, right? So this is by far and away, you have the best chance to win. And it comes at the right time because, like you said, you win this game and then maybe, an Iowa State, a Colorado, a Baylor, those games suddenly feel like, okay, you're in a better position to maybe trying to go win those because you've gotten the monkey off your back, so to speak. You're in the win column. You can start to try to build something. Whereas if you lose this game, things don't look great for the rest of the year. So this game has a chance to really, it's somewhat like stating the obvious, but also not really. It's like, hey, this is your first game off a bye. You're halfway through the season. Your 7th game has the chance to define the rest of your season, right? So it's like, okay, yeah, duh. But also, when you look at the schedule, when you look at the opponent KU has in front of them with Houston, it does make a lot of sense. Like, hey, win this game, kind of get back on your feet a little bit, and maybe that'll help kind of spark something for you where you'll be able to stack up a few more wins maybe down the rest of the way against what looked like some pretty tough competition versus lose this game and maybe it goes from bad to worse.
Yeah, I think so. Everybody always talks about how the most important game is the next one. Well, in this case, the next one really is the most important game. And so Kansas really needs to get back on those right tracks. And I think, too, Nick, like Kansas has a chance to not just win, but get right in a lot of areas in this game. With how sound Houston is defensively, they do a good job. They're usually, in their run fits, all of those things. If Kansas lines up and runs the ball and moves guys around and does things in the running game, that could be a really good indicator for the rest of this year. If Jalen Daniels continues where he left off against Arizona State, that's a great indicator because you're, at that point, it's not just, hey, he had a nice night. It's, okay, this thing is maybe turned around. If Quentin Skinner has another really big game after the one against Arizona State, or even if you just unlock a guy like LJ Arnold, and I think that Skinner being able to get deep and defenses having to look at that part, I think that opens up a lot of things for LJ Arnold to kind of work the middle of the field and do, hit some of the areas where maybe he's most effective. And so if you do those things, if you hold Houston under, 300 yards and the defense has sort of that bounce back too, I think there are a lot of areas here where not only could Kansas get right in terms of adding to that win column, which is ultimately the most important part, but also get right in some areas where you feel like, okay, this is going to establish confidence and or momentum for the rest of the year.
All right, well, Kevin, let's put your money where your mouth is, man. Game picks. Do you think Kansas is going to do that? Do you think Kansas is going to do everything you just mentioned and win this game?
I do think they win. I think it may wind up being a little bit close for comfort. I don't have a lot of faith in this Houston offense to go out and be just terrific. I think this could wind up being a lot like the UNLV game, where it's kind of defined by whether or not Kansas makes mistakes that help UNLV, get those extra points. And so if we're asking, do I think they cover? I think they're probably right about at the line for me. I think they're probably about a touchdown or so. If you're asking for a game score, maybe 24-17 or something of that nature. But this is obviously a really big game and a really big chance for Kansas to kind of get back on its feet. How about you?
Yeah, I've gone back and forth. I think I'm gonna pick Kansas to win this game. I think they have more talent. I trust that the offense is starting to figure some things out. I think this is a game where you have the chance, if you're Jalen Daniels, to go ball out. You have a chance, if you're Jeff Grimes, to maybe silence some doubters by putting together a solid game plan with an offense that I think over the last 3 games, really, outside of some moments against CCU, that it feels like the offense is ascending. Certainly much better than where they were in the non-conference. And I think this is a game where that could continue because you're not playing against a very potent Houston defense. They've got some playmakers in the secondary that certainly Jalen Daniels will have to be aware of. But play turnover-free football, play to your strengths with the ground game, and go back to the option. I mean, I'll say it. Go back to the option. I know there was a lot of griping about a speed option call into the boundary against Arizona State. I don't care. You know what? Jeff Grimes is doing what I ask. We love the speed option. That's all I care about. So I do think that Kansas is going to win this game. And I think potentially it could play out kind of how I outlined earlier in the show, which is I think Kansas will get out to an early lead, and then there may be a moment in the game where Houston starts to come back a little bit, and then there'll be a late third quarter, early fourth quarter sort of moment where the offense can put the game away, and I think they finally will take that step and do that. So I'm going to go with Kansas. I'm going to go with Kansas. I think they'll actually win pretty comfortably. I'm going to say 38-24 Kansas. Listen, I had the bye week. I had the chance to go up on the mountaintop, practice some Zen, clear the energy. I went with Aaron Rodgers to his darkness retreat And we came out together, and he was like, you know what? I want Robert Saleh fired. I came out, and I was like, you know what? Kansas football is going to be okay. So we were not
Nick also said, when you miss on a pass, blame Mike Williams.
I didn't tell Sin. When my dog was a treat, I went up to the mountaintop. I did some practicing some Zen, cleared the mind, cleared the energy a little bit. I think Kansas gets back on track with this game against Houston. And boy, they do not. Yikes. Hopefully that doesn't happen. So regardless, listen, Kevin said this game could be a good indicator of how the rest of the season goes. What would be a great indicator for you of how your life would go would be to subscribe to our channels. You can subscribe to us on Apple and Spotify to listen all there for all of our KU basketball and KU football coverage. As we get into this crossover season, you can also subscribe on our YouTube channel at Kansas Jayhawks KCSN. We have some exclusive clips that we spoke with players for the KU basketball team, for KU football as well. Some Lance Leipold clips over on our YouTube channel. Also, that you can check out. Excuse me. Get choked up just thinking about it. And you can also, drop a comment, share your thoughts, join us on the KCSN mobile hotline at 913-407-6524. Plenty of ways to share your thoughts. Did you go on a dark streak like I did? Did you clear your mind? Did you feel better about Kansas going in again this game against Houston? Let me know. Let me know what you've done on your bye week. Let us know what you've done on your bye week. That'd be great too. So again, lots of ways to connect, lots of ways to subscribe, be sure to spread the word about us. And listen, Saturday night, we may have a post-game show. It's still up in the air. Sorry about the scheduling issue, but you'll definitely want to be subscribed to the YouTube channel, have your notifications on so you'll know if we might be having a live show after the game on Saturday. Just there's some timing stuff that we got to work through. Part of it is involving Nick Pobb. We got to clear some things with Nick Pobb to make sure we can do that. But, that's neither here nor there. So be on the lookout for that. But otherwise, be on the lookout still for all of our content over on KCSN. And until then, he's Kevin Flaherty. I'm Nick Springer. We'll talk to you again soon. See you.